Thank you, Sean. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. Welcome to New Freedom. Welcome to Position of Neutrality. We open every session of Position of Neutrality with a prayer, and Chaplain Lee is back in the house tonight.
Come on and stand to your feet all over the room. What's up? All glory to the Lord. Father, we thank you tonight. We give you the praise, the glory, and the honor. We welcome you into our presence on tonight. We know that you're already here because you are omnipresent God. You're all over this room. You're in the aisles. You're touching the hearts of each and every one of us that are here. Right now, God, we ask you just to have your way in this meeting. We ask you to just bless those that are on their way. We ask you to bless the manservant as he speaks, Lord, for your goodness in this place, that they'll hear from you, Lord, through him, and feel your presence, the power that resonates down on the inside. Wake it up in each and every one of us so that we'll be the one who you're calling for in these last and evil days. We thank you and we praise you in the mighty name of Jesus. Let everyone say, amen.
Thank you very much, Chaplain Lee. Let Chaplain Lee know how much he's missed when he's not here. He hadn't been feeling so great all the time, but he's been doing better this week. Can we get a shout out for Chaplain Lee, how much he's appreciated? All right. So who's here for the first time tonight? Wow, a few of you. That's cool. You're out in her? All right. Well, first of all, welcome, and second, let us warn you in advance, you'll have to experience us just a little different than other meetings of other fellowships you may have attended. And the primary reason that's liable to happen is we intend for you to have a different experience here. What we do here, we've been doing for lots of years. We take a look at the suggested instruction for a step or so a week directly out of this book, and we use this book in 12-Step Recovery. Why? Yeah, the process described by the authors of this book's been proven to work for addicts of the hopeless variety, addicts to alcohol and other substances. True? True. So what we do here is we try and show people how to find their own testimony within the testimony of the authors. The foreword to the first edition says to show others precisely how we've recovered is the main purpose of the book. So what we do here is I try and show you how I find my experience in it and encourage you to have your experience with it. And if we both do our job, we share a spiritual awakening in this room every time we meet. How many can witness for us that happen? So there's a show of hands. For those of you online, you can't see that because of the anonymous nature of our fellowships. But for you in the room, we raise our hand to signify when we speak of a spiritual experience in 12-Step Recovery, we're speaking of a sensory experience. I forgot to give it. Hey, how many of you guys are among the many who came up to me and said, hey, where's Lance been? Lance is back in the house tonight. All right, so anyway, when we speak of a spiritual experience in 12-Step Recovery, we're talking about a sensory experience. You will feel it. And when you do, I'll know. And I'll call it to your attention, because we would cheat you to talk to you about the power we call God without giving you a demonstration of the power. And one of the little things we do around here, so as not to confuse or to arouse prejudice, when I say God, you say, and you might think we're doing that for silly reasons, but we're not. We know some people have had bad religious experiences, or some people have been misinformed about this tangible sensory power that we find within ourselves that we in recovery call God. So rather than people get prejudiced and no longer focus on where our common ground is, we're just going to talk about power as an equivalent, because that's what we're really talking about anyway, power to live, yeah? All right, so tonight we're in steps 8 and 9, and the house is full. So either a bunch of you want to get free, or you didn't get the memo. No one got the joke either. How many of you have been afraid of those amends that you might have to make? How many of you were afraid of telling secrets to somebody? How many of you were afraid of telling secrets to somebody because you knew if you did that, eventually you're going to have to go out and make amends? So everything we've done up to this point has prepared us for this moment. We're going to confront our fears, and then we're going to move out, and we're going to learn to subordinate our ego to the spirit within, take captive every thought. And the first step of that action is to go out and admit to the people we've wronged how we've wronged them and get some instruction on what we can do to make it right. Make sense? Yeah. So we're going to start on page 76, middle of the page. And it says, now we need more action, without which we find that faith without works is dead. How many of you recognize that from another book? Yeah, it should be familiar to you. It's from the book of James. And they're not doing that to arouse prejudice. They're doing that because for the alcoholic, for the addict, we need to prove this power to us through us. How many of you have been delivered from something radical into something different? How many of you have, even after that delivery, sometimes confront circumstances that make you go, oh, I don't know if I can do this? So what we're going to do, because of our nature, is we're going to have to continue serving. We're going to have to continue lifting each other up, because we constantly need to be reminded, I don't know what you're doing, but I do know what you've done. And if I'm constantly witnessing to what's been done for me, then I'll get through whatever it is we're doing now. Does that make sense? Some of you felt that. Who felt that? Most of us in this room have been delivered from something fairly radical. It's just sort of it's what you pay to get in these seats. So we have a list of all persons we've harmed and to whom we are willing to make amends. Any of you have such a list? Where'd you get it? 4-step. Yeah, they said we made it when we took inventory. And then it says we subjected ourselves to a drastic self-appraisal. Those of you who have done a 4-step, would you agree with them?
Gross understatement.
Now we go out to our fellows and repair the damage done in the past. Pay attention to the words they use. Sorry about my voice going. When did they say we go out to do it? Now. If I got a list, when? You're not hearing me. If I got a list, when do I go out? Now. If you're not in action, you're sliding. People ask me, how do I know if I'm in trouble? I say, if you got to ask that question, you're already in trouble. Because we walk in certainty, don't we? Okay. All right, so, and the good news is being in trouble isn't an unfamiliar thing for us, but we got to take action. We got to continue to take action, yes? I'm going to be gripped by fear, but I will confront that fear, and on the other side of fear, I will have strengthened my faith, and everyone else will think that I've done something courageous, because they weren't in my boots when I felt all the fear I felt as I went through it. Okay. So now it says, we attempt to sweep away the debris which is accumulated out of our effort to live on self-will and run the show ourselves. If we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. They're telling us more and more emphatically, willingness is divine power. If you've never been able to do things and follow through on things, remember that newfound willingness coming from within you sometimes needs to be summoned so you can confront the next obstacle. Does that make sense? And don't criticize people, please, when you don't think they're showing willingness. None of us did at some point. And willingness is divine power, and that power is love, and so that power responds to love and lift. Does that make sense? Encouraging, never discouraging. All right, so remember it was agreed at the beginning we could go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. They put it in italics. Why? And who do we make the agreement with? God. Yeah, if we're not comfortable saying God, we made that agreement with our innermost self, did we not? The first step in recovery is we fully conceded to our innermost self. Can't do that based on a lie. Yeah? Okay. So probably there's still some misgivings.
No shit.
You guys get Sean's wit? When we start to look at the list, huh? As we look over the list of business acquaintances and friends we have hurt, we may feel diffident about going to some of them on a spiritual basis. You know what they're talking about? How many of you lived a life that didn't really arouse people's eyes towards your spirituality all the time? Sometimes no matter what our intent, the way we ended up acting seemed contraindicated to what we claimed we wanted, didn't it? Yeah. So all of a sudden I'm going to go out and start telling people what I'm trying to do, grow spiritually, and I'm going to give credit to this power that's restored me, right? Let us know when you're done. We good? Thanks. To some people, too much, over the top? That's Michael. It's all right. Mike, he just didn't know they could hear him in that back part of the room. Let us be reassured, to some people we need not and probably should not emphasize the spiritual feature on our first approach. They seem to indicate there's going to be more than one approach, don't they? So we might prejudice them. At the moment, we're trying to put our lives in order, but this is not an end in itself. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. So a lot of us lived a life that lacked purpose, or at least seemingly lacked purpose. And they told us we would find that power and purpose deep down within. In fact, they said the fundamental idea of God would be found deep down inside. So I go through all of this stuff that is difficult, admittedly, but it had to be difficult in order to refine the divine nature that I need to truly be a servant in the world. Does that make sense? Absolutely, the worst experiences of your life have prepared you for the mission you've been assigned. And all we got to do is learn to tell the story as a victor rather than a victim. Understand that you've received a calling, this is not a curse, and then walk out in it. Does it make sense? And I know it sounds simple and it's really hard, but that's why we need a power greater than ourselves. Right? I could just do it myself if it didn't require a power greater than me, but I know my ego will defeat me if I don't have something to override that and make me walk into the difficulty, because I have had that lived experience before. All right, so it's seldom wise to approach an individual who still smarts from our injustice to him and announce that we've gone religious. How many of you have tried that and find out that they're right? It is seldom wise to do that. How many of you have been the guy that went out and told people, what? Been out there looking for God? Sure sorry. Sure sorry about your stereo. They didn't really want to know that much about my search for God. They just wanted to know where their stereo was, right? So I'm a little disingenuous until I'm living a more restored existence, yes? Okay, so in the prize ring, this would be called leading with the chin. Why lay ourselves open to being branded fanatics or religious bores? We may kill a future opportunity to carry a beneficial message. But our man is sure to be impressed with a sincere desire to set right the wrong. How would I demonstrate a sincere desire to set right a wrong? I'd show up with a plan and a payment or whatever it is, right? May not be payment in full, but it'd be a plan to make it right, wouldn't it? All right, so he's going to be more interested in a demonstration of goodwill than our talk of spiritual discoveries. We don't use this as an excuse for shying away from the subject of God. Where's my people that did the wave? There you go. Come on, get the wave going. You got the whole group, you got to get them going. When it'll serve any good purpose, we're willing to announce our convictions with tact and common sense. How many of you can recognize how difficult it can be for people, especially half of these people were atheists or agnostics in the beginning. And now they're going out and they're honoring their third step and they're giving credit to His power, His love, His way of life with tact and common sense, which means they ain't trying to spin it. How many of you have been more churchy than that, and still, because of the life you lived, it was a little hard sometimes. Your mind would tell you, I can't say that. They know who I am. Yeah, the whole point of this is so that you will learn who you are and whose you are, so that you won't believe that lie that you aren't all of that. And until we get you through that stuff, you're not going to know that so that you can speak it with power. Does that make sense? So the question of how to approach the man we hated will arise. Any of you got some of those?
Oh, yeah.
No one raised a hand. No one wants to hate. It may be that he's done us more harm than we've done him, and though we may have acquired a better attitude toward him, we're still not too keen about admitting our faults. I mean, have you ever been stuck in the way you treated somebody who was really not very nice to you, but you really couldn't move forward and get rid of it in your thought life because of you kept going back to, well, he was worse than me. It does us damage is all we're trying to say. It blocks us, right? If I can't get into a forgiving place even for the worst offenders in my life, then I'm never going to experience the real true miracle of forgiveness, which is that I am an instrument of said forgiveness. Does it make sense? That's the only way you can, in a sensory way, really feel it is to walk in it as an instrument of it. So nevertheless, with a person we dislike, we take the bit in our teeth. What do they mean? If any of you like me, kind of a farm kid, if the animal gets the bit in the teeth, you're going where the animal wants to go. Any delusion of control is gone. So they're not suggesting we take control of the take control of the people, but we take control of the situation. We initiate the engagement. Does it make sense? Yeah. It's harder to go to an enemy than to a friend, but we find it much more beneficial to us. We go to him in a helpful and forgiving spirit, confessing our former ill feeling and expressing our regret. Don't miss the instruction there. We go to him in a helpful and forgiving spirit. That is going to require that I get centered in the spirit first. Yes. If I do not, I'm liable to be going back another time to make amends for the amends I attempted to make.
Very true.
Any of you that have ever made approaches and you weren't ready for their response, you know what I'm talking about. All right, so under no condition do we criticize such a person or argue. Simply we tell them that we'll never get over drinking until we've done our utmost to straighten out the past. I can't say that if I don't know that. It won't ring. I'll never get over my addictive disorder until I've done my utmost to set right my wrongs to you. We're linked. And so if you will let me do that, I'd be honored to admit to you the ill feelings and things that I've expressed towards you, and you can tell me, if you will, what I can do to make it right. And they may tell me, get out and stay out. I've been told that many times. But there were times in my life when people gave me a simple order like that and I would not obey it. I would keep coming back and harassing them because what do you mean you won't forgive? But the changed nature says if you tell me to get out and stay out, then I can honor that. And if it's sometime in the future you ask me to come back, I can do that too. Make sense? Okay. So we're there to sweep off our side of the street, realizing that nothing worthwhile can be accomplished until we do so. Never trying to tell him what he should do. His faults are not discussed. We stick to our own. See how many times they said the same thing in different ways? How many times did you have to make approaches to people before you could let go of your anger towards them, even though you were trying to live better towards them? They're trying to set a realistic example of what it might look like, right? And this is the fitness step, getting you ready for the real amends, which is the 12th step. And I'll guarantee you, if you skip this before you go out to that trap house or that alcoholic scene where everything's disheveled and a mess and the person you thought you knew is not that person, although they're occupying their body, you're never going to be able to never tell them what they should do, not discuss their faults. The only way that's going to happen is if you know that you're there as an instrument of healing and they already feel dead, we're supposed to speak life into them. And I've got to be guarded. I've got to be stronger in the spirit than in the senses. Does it make sense? So we take this work seriously because this is preparatory for a life of service. So then it says we stick to our own. If our manner is calm, frank, and open, we will be gratified with the result. So what do they mean, calm manner? Have you ever felt a lot of anxiety, but been able to manifest a presence that did not show your anxiety?
Right.
If I'm centered in the Spirit, I'll be able to act better than I feel like acting. Any of you ever had that experience?
Yeah.
Calm, frank, what do they mean?
Direct. Not
Direct, exactly right. Sean and I know, sometimes we try and spin it to make ourselves look better, even though we went there to make it right. Any of you ever done that? So they don't need a spin. They need to know that I know what they already know. And I know they don't deserve it. Does it make sense? And then, what do they mean by open? More than honest, I'm open to accepting their perception, even if it's different than mine. And oftentimes it is, because to Lance's point, I've been living in a state of delusion, and I don't really know, I don't always see the world from your perspective. Okay, so in 9 cases out of 10, the unexpected happens. Sometimes the man we're calling upon admits his own fault, so feuds of years standing melt away in an hour. Rarely do we fail to make satisfactory progress. Our former enemies sometimes praise what we're doing and wish us well, and occasionally they'll offer assistance. It should not matter, however, if someone does throw us out of his office. We've made our demonstration, done our part. It's water over the dam. Sorry about that, guys. If I'm not empowered in the Spirit when I'm rejected, I don't know about you, but it brings up some of the worst core fears I have, that I'm just not good enough. And it's an absolute lie I've lived in my whole life. Of course I'm good enough. I'm good enough to come in here and admit to you how horribly I treated you and ask you if there's any way humanly possible to make it right. That's a courageous act. That's a faith-filled act, right? But I better know it and know it. Does it make sense? So it says most alcoholics owe money.
no shit.
Some of these things seem like understatements, but a lot of us get here and we try and hide. Any of you ever try and put on airs that you were more, had more? So most of us get here, the playing field is fairly even if we don't want anyone to know, right? And so what we're trying to do is say, look, you're going to go through a preparatory phase, and one of the things we've got to do is we've got to get out from under obligations we failed to meet.
Yep.
Does that make sense? So we can start living free. So we do not dodge our creditors. Well, why would they say that?
Because it's part of our management.
Yeah, and how many of you have had experience with dodging your creditors? I've had significant experience with dodging my creditors. Power and my creditors? Who did that? It's actually very, very insightful, because if I let them, the people I owe money, they're not after my money, they're after their money. If I don't at least acknowledge them and start making a plan to make it right. I'll never open my mail or answer the phone or any of the things. And so I'm still living in the prison I was trying to escape. And I can't live in that prison stone cold sober. I'm going to have to anesthetize. So anyway, it says, we do not dodge our creditors, telling them what we're trying to do. We make no bones about our drinking. They usually know it anyway, whether we think so or not. How many of you thought you were pretty slick with your addiction? How many of you found out that maybe the secret was out a little before you thought it was? Nor are we afraid of disclosing our alcoholism on the theory it may cause financial harm. Now, don't read that wrong. They said don't be afraid of disclosing your alcoholism on a theory that will cause you financial harm. If you're telling somebody who you did not harm of your alcoholism, that's more than a theory, that's a reality. It could very well block an opportunity and cause you financial harm. But if you have done harm to somebody, they have a right to know that you know, and that you know they didn't deserve it, and that you have an earnest desire to make it right to their specification. Does that make sense? So that's not to say just go blurting to everybody I'm an alcoholic or an addict, because not everyone understands what we're talking about. I don't even tell you I'm alcoholic or I'm addict until I'm crushed by a self-imposed crisis. I cannot postpone or evade and fearlessly face the proposition God's either everything or nothing, and I made that choice. He's everything. So there's no point in telling you my alcoholism when I'm still drinking, because I'm just drunk dying on the vine. And when I tell you I'm an alcoholic today, I'm a guy who died and now was raised, and I'm telling you the story of the power that raised me. That's what I'm telling you. Does it make sense? Okay, so it goes on to say that approached in this way, the most ruthless creditor will sometimes surprise us. Arranging the best deal we can, we let these people know we're sorry. Our drinking has made us slow to pay. And then a caution, we must lose our fear of creditors no matter how far we have to go, for we're liable to drink if we're afraid to face them. So we've already talked about why that is, right? I've got to quit living in fear. Fear has driven me all my life, driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. I step on the toes of my fellows and they retaliate. And sometimes they hurt me seemingly without provocation. But I invariably find that at some time in the past I've made decisions based on self which have later placed me in a position to be hurt. And it's oftentimes just my own ideas that place me there and hurt me. Does that make sense? Okay. Oh, here's one for this room. Listen up, everybody. Perhaps we've committed a criminal offense which might land us in jail if it were known to the authority. We may be short in our accounts and unable to make good. We've already admitted this in confidence to another person, but we're sure we would be imprisoned or lose our job if it were known. Maybe it's only a petty offense, such as padding the expense account. Most of us have done that sort of thing. Maybe we're divorced and have remarried, but haven't kept up the alimony, number one. She's indignant about it and has a warrant out for our arrest. That's a common form of trouble too. Did any of that resonate with any of you? We sometimes, when we first come into recovery and we try to grow spiritually, we pick, oh, I'm not that, I'm not that. It's more important that you find if you have any common thread at all, if you've ever done any of these things, because it's not about your troubles matching my troubles. It's about us having a common solution. Does that make sense? So what they go on to tell us is although these reparations take innumerable forms, so as many people as in this room, that's how many different forms of reparations we're liable to encounter. Does that make sense? But the common experience is the power to walk through difficulty. Does that make sense? Okay, so there are some general principles which we find guiding. Would you like to hear some general principles that they found guiding? Reminding ourselves that we've decided to go to any lengths to find a spiritual experience. I'm good, thank you. So a lot of times we get to recovery rooms and we think the goal is abstinence. And we celebrate abstinence, don't we? And those of us who can't maintain continuous abstinence, we feel bad about ourselves, more so than we did before, yeah? But when you understand the manner of living, my goal was never abstinence. That's a byproduct of growing in the Spirit. The goal was to awaken spiritually. So I need to remind myself when I'm struggling with moving forward, remind myself, where's the power found? Deep down inside. It's only there that he may be found. Remind myself that I've decided to go any length for victory. Again, I don't know what you're doing, but I do know what you've done. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So we ask that we've been given strength and direction to do the right thing. Strength and direction to do the right thing. It's going to take both, because sometimes what I think is the right thing is not the right thing. Sometimes what the world thinks is the right thing is not the right thing. And then it says, no matter what the personal consequences may be, we may lose our reputation or face jail, but we're willing, we have to be. We must not shrink at anything. I always see Jeff in the back of the room when this happens. Jeff went to, and then he went and did 4.5, 5 years in prison, and then he came back and started chairing the meeting again. And so you know, apparently God had a ministry for Jeff on the yard. And anyway, if you don't know Jeff's story, if you met him in prison, he was Rhino or Coach. Usually, however, other people are involved. Therefore, we're not to be the hasty and foolish martyr who would needlessly sacrifice others to save himself from the alcoholic pit. A man we know had remarried because of resentment and drinking. He'd not paid alimony to his first wife. She was furious. She went to court and got an order for his arrest. He had commenced our way of life, had secured a position, and was getting his head above water. It would have been impressive heroics if he'd walked up to the judge and said, here I am. It would have been impressive heroics, wouldn't it? Yeah. And we can acknowledge that. If I'm trying to grow spiritually, is impressive heroics really the indicated action? Yeah, I mean, it's just the opposite. If I have to do something, fine, but just to throw myself out there as a martyr is not the point. Does it make sense? So it says, we thought he ought to be willing to do that if necessary, so no one's telling you won't have to do something. That's why I always like to mention Jeff. No one's telling you won't have to. But if he were in jail, he could provide nothing for either family. We suggested he write his first wife, admitting his faults and asking forgiveness. He did, and also sent a small amount of money. He told her what he would try and do in the future. He said he was perfectly willing to go to jail if she insisted. Which of those things do you think were most important or impactful to the ex-wife that had been treated badly? Yeah, it's probably the totality of it, right? It's not the fact that I'm there admitting this. I sincerely do hope one day that she can forgive me, because I know the freedom is in the forgiveness. But it comes in your own time. But I didn't do any of this to stop from going to jail. I just did this to make it right with you. And if I need to go to jail, then so be it, right? So all of that combined, and then he tells the story of what happened. Of course, she did not, and the whole situation has long since been adjusted. Now, admit it, many of us have had to go admit things to some people that we thought were not going to turn out well. And so it's easy to say after the fact, of course they did not. But that's not what the fear was telling me all the way up to it, right? So that's what any lengths might look like. When they say we're willing to go to any lengths, they're describing for you what any lengths might look like to grow in the Spirit. Right. So before taking drastic action, which might implicate other people, we secure their consent. That's the others. If I go to the judge, I'm liable to get sent to jail. I have another family at home. So I needed to have talked to that other family and that employer about what I needed to do for the ex before, except when to do so would injure them or others. I needed them to buy into my recovery plan because in my addiction plan, I didn't consult anybody. I just took the money. I'm the only one? So now we're going to walk into freedom. We're going to walk into it together. Does it make sense? All right, so if we have obtained permission, here's some guiding principles. Have consulted with others. You guys are running. Ask God to help. And the drastic step is indicated. We must not shrink. You know why we call your attention to when we say God, you say? Half of these guys were atheists or agnostics, but they told you when they ask,
They got the power.
they got the power. Think about the power of that testimony. That's how you come to believe. Make sense? Okay, this ends. While drinking, he accepted a sum of money from a bitterly hated business rival, giving him no receipt for it. He subsequently denied having received the money and used the incident as a basis for discrediting the man. He thus used his own wrongdoing as a means of destroying the reputation of another. In fact, his rival was ruined. Have any of you ever promised to perform something and took money for said performance while you were drinking? Have any of you, like me, discovered the evaporative rate of money in my possession while drinking? None of you have ever had money evaporate in your possession while drinking or using? There's an explanation, but none that I care to give. So that's what he said. He gave the man no receipt. He didn't like him anyway. So screw him. Cat didn't pay me. You all went quiet. Did we return to home, or what happened? He felt that he'd done a wrong that he could not possibly make right. Any of you couldn't start on your amends because you just knew, man, I've harmed him so bad I can never make it right. That's a lie. You've harmed him so bad that the old you can't make it right, but the new man in you can and will. The new man in you can and will. If he opened that old affair, he was afraid that it would destroy the reputation of his partner, disgrace his family, and take away his means of livelihood. What right had he to involve those dependent upon him? Question mark. So based on what we've learned so far, the guiding principles, what right did he have? None without their permission, right? So I need to have obtained permission prior. And then it says, how could he possibly make a public statement exonerating his rival?
With their permission.
I've got their permission, then I'm going to have to figure out who it is I've harmed and how I've harmed them. And then I'm going to have to summon, get centered in the Spirit and go do that. This guy, just so you understand what happened with him, because it's not as clear in the text as it is if you read some more involved writings on the guy, but he was one of the more churchy early AAs. And so his church community was important to him. And so the dude that had given him the money while drinking had given him money for the church fund, and he denied having received it. So he not only defrauded the church, he ruined the man's reputation in front of his church family. Does that make sense? And so now, and if you guys don't get that because you never had a church family, how many of you have helped yourself to the seventh tradition because they were silly enough to entrust you with it? Like two of us in the whole room, Wayne. I suspect there's more. They ain't been to that many meetings. But anyway, so he felt he'd done wrong he could not possibly make right. If he opened that old affair, he was afraid it would destroy the reputation of his partner, disgrace his family, and take away his means of livelihood. What right had he to involve those dependent upon him? How could he make a public statement exonerating his rival? We come to that question. I've told you the story. He says, after consulting with his wife and partner, he came to the conclusion it was better to take those risks than to stand before his Creator guilty of such ruinous slander. if I didn't tell you the backstory, you wouldn't understand why all of a sudden he's afraid of standing before his Creator. But because he already knew that or thought he knew that he had disappointed his Creator, he was a little bit afraid of going back and confronting all those people, and it doesn't make sense. But he did know if he didn't do that, that it was all over anyway. So it says he saw that he had to place the outcome in God's hands, or he'd soon start drinking again anyway. All would be lost anyhow. So he attended church for the first time in many years. This guy had been driven away from what was important to him spiritually for years because of this offense, and he could not go back. And now he's going to go back, and he's going to face that centered in the Spirit. That's what any links might look like. And he said after the sermon, he quietly got up and made an explanation. How quiet do you think he felt?
Real quiet.
My guess is that he was feeling a little agitation and anxiety, don't you imagine?
Yes.
But his manner was calm,
Right.
frank, and open. They're painting the picture. Does that make sense to you? It says his action met widespread approval, and today he's one of the most trusted citizens of his town. This all happened years ago. So they're painting you a picture of the restoration of us alcoholics and addicts as a result of this manner of living through this power. The thief of the church fund becomes the most trusted citizen of the town through the power of God. Does that make sense? It's impactful. Some of you feel it, some of you don't feel it, but I want you to concentrate on how you might feel if that were you. Because I'll guarantee you, if you'll own that experience, it will move in you. All right, so the chances are that we have domestic troubles. Anybody? Where's my tweakers? I know y'all had domestic trouble. Perhaps we're mixed up with women in a fashion we wouldn't care to have advertised. We doubt if in this respect alcoholics are fundamentally much worse than other people. But drinking does complicate sex relations in the home. After a few years with an alcoholic, a wife gets worn out, resentful, and uncommunicative. How many of you have recognized that in your own walk? So they got a chapter to the wives, so that those of us who experience worn out, resentful, and uncommunicative, that's what my eyes see. But I need to ask a deeper question. How could they be any other way, given how I presented?
Right.
Does it make sense? Why there's a chapter to the wives, so I can look at it through another lens.
Right.
Because the insanity of addiction is a lack of perspective. I need to be able to see the world through more than one perspective than mine.
Yep.
All right, so he said, how could she be anything else? The husband begins to feel lonely, sorry for himself. That ever happen?
Yep.
And we didn't do very good at being gender neutral back in these days, but, you know, pick a flavor and run with it. He commences to look around in the nightclubs or their equivalent for something besides liquor.
Christie's Cabaret.
I'm just going to walk right away from that. Perhaps he's having a secret and exciting affair with the girl who understands. Have any of you ever met him or her?
Yes.
The one who understands. Is it really their understanding that we're talking about?
No.
No, it's not their understanding that's in question, is it?
No.
All right, so in fairness, we must say that she may understand, but what are we going to do about a thing like that? Remember, the question mark in the book is to go introspective. Eyesight without insight, spiritual blindness. I've walked around blind long enough. I don't want to do that anymore. I'm going to have to take this action. Does it make sense? A man so involved often feels very remorseful at times, especially if he's married to a loyal and courageous girl who's literally gone through hell for him. Any of you treat people bad and then had to make up a new thing? Any of you guys that created chaos just so you wouldn't, maybe they'll leave me. Come on, I've done enough fifth steps, I know. Plotting their murders and planning their funerals. Whatever the situation, we usually have to do something about it. If we're sure our wife does not know, should we tell her? Wow, that was emphatic. Nobody knows? Not always, we think. If she knows in a general way that we've been wild, should we tell her in detail? Do not tell them in detail, right? How many of you have had the experience of being told in detail when you demanded it? It is a compassionate act not to tell them in detail, because as the recipient of someone who has received it in detail, I am not an Etch-a-Sketch. It does not go away. Undoubtedly, we should admit our fault. She may insist on knowing all the particulars. She'll want to know who the woman is and where she is. We feel we ought to say to her that we have no right to involve another person. We're sorry for what we've done, and God willing, it shall not be repeated. More than that, we cannot do. We have no right to go further, though there may be justifiable exceptions. So here's the deal. If you're working with somebody or it's you, and you come up with a reason why you just can't follow through on this, okay. There may be justifiable exceptions. But when I did that, this is what you get to do. When I did that, I went ahead and coughed it up right on the spot. And I escaped temporarily because her focus changed from me to the other. But who was the common element in the wrong? Not her, me. So nothing got made right. My behavior did not change because I didn't invite the power in. And it isn't until now that I'm using this, the power of witness, that guy that behaved that way without giving it much thought, now is not able to even think that way without giving it a lot of thought. It just won't reside in me. Does that make any sense? I'm not telling you I don't see things that make me go. I'm telling you I can't harbor that. So, though there may be justifiable exceptions, and though we wish to lay down no rule of any sort, we've often found this the best course. And so the best course would have been, I have no right, she didn't do it to you, I did. I'm not trying to withhold anything from you. Tell me what I can do to make it right, whatever that is. Well, the thing is, you're going to do it again if you don't own it. Because that's the history of my life. I'm going to do it again if I don't own it. I may do it again even if I do own it, but I damn sure will if I don't. So our design for living is not a one-way street. It's as good for the wife as for the husband.
Don't say that out loud.
If we can forget, so can she. You know why he said that? He's probably said, get over yourself. You shouldn't think that way. And that always stops them right in their tracks. Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
No. It's a good little thing for people to discover on their own.
Right.
No human I've ever met wants to be told how they should think or feel. All of us know when we're uncomfortable, and we know desperately we would like to not feel that way, and being told I shouldn't feel that way is not helpful. Does it make sense? Yep. All right, so it's better, however, that one does not needlessly name a person upon whom she can vent jealousy. Perhaps there are some cases where the utmost frankness is demanded. No outsider can appraise such an intimate situation. So who's the outsider?
Anybody but the couple.
Yeah, and quite frankly, if I'm holding back something from her for her benefit, then I'm going to have to hold my mud on that too.
Yep.
Does it make sense?
Yep.
Even though it may seem easier in the moment to tell her what she's asking for, I need to carry that burden. I'm the one that inflicted the pain. I need to carry that burden. I don't get to pour it out on them. Does it make sense?
Yep.
All right, so it may be that both will decide that the way of good sense and loving kindness is to let bygones be bygones. Each might pray about it, having the other one's happiness uppermost in mind. Keep it always in sight that we're dealing with that most terrible human emotion, jealousy. Good generalship may decide that the problem be attacked on the flank rather than risk face-to-face combat. They're trying to describe for us that our changed nature is better observed than heard. Just by the way I'll believe it when I catch you acting in a changed way. In a familiar situation, you act in an unfamiliar way. Does that make sense? And until then, I've got a prejudice about our past interactions that will not allow me to hear what you're trying to tell me. Does it make any sense? And we're all that way. It's another reason why faith without works is dead. It's an observable act. It inspires others. If people know who I've been, and then they see who I am, and they ask, how did you do all that? Well, I didn't. But I can introduce you to the one who did. Does it make sense? All right, so if we have no such complication, there is plenty we should do at home. Sometimes we hear an alcoholic say the only thing he needs to do is keep sober. You ever hear that? We actually hear it way too frequently, don't we? Does that make any sense in light of anyone else's history? Be honest. How many of you got sober only to not be sober? So if the only thing I got to do is the one thing I've admitted I'm powerless to do, this is not a logical manner of living, is it? If I'm capable of that, I lied and won. Anyway, certainly he must keep sober, for there will be no home if he doesn't, but he's yet a long way from making good to the wife or parents whom for years he's so shockingly treated, passing all understanding as the patients mothers and wives have had with alcoholics. Have you ever heard that scripturally where they said peace that passes all understanding? They're trying to give you a real world view of what that looks like. The devastation we inflicted, many of us inflicted on our families and loved ones, and yet they showed patience. That's that peace that passes all understanding. They stood in the gap for us. Does that make sense? Had this not been so, many of us would have no homes today, would perhaps be dead. The alcoholic is like a tornado roaring his way through the lives of others. Hearts are broken, sweet relationships are dead, affections have been uprooted. Selfish and inconsiderate habits have kept the home in turmoil. We feel a man is unthinking when he says that sobriety is enough. I always like to point out to the new people that are going to hear all kinds of plans. I don't pick up no matter what. And I get that's what it looks like, but that's not what's up. If I was still under that obsession I used to be under, I'd pick up no matter what. Without the manner of living, that's all nonsense. I understand that's what it looks like. I ain't arguing with you. You don't pick up no matter what. You go through trials and trepidations. If you really are who you say you are, you really do that. I'm telling you, I don't. If I'm not empowered in the Spirit, we're all in trouble. So he's like a farmer who came out of the cyclone cellar to find his home ruined. To his wife he remarked, "Don't see anything matter here, Ma. Ain't it grand the wind stopped blowing?" Any of you ever do that? I won't even go into that story. Yes, there's a long period of reconstruction ahead, and we must take the lead. There's a reconstruction going back. What is the reconstruction? I'm at a new foundation for a new life, a new man within me. And I'm not that other guy. That other guy has to die through this process of coming to believe. Does that make sense? So a remorseful mumbling that we're sorry won't fill the bill at all. You ever thought about why that is?
Because it takes action.
Well, and I might even be sorry, but when I say, half the time I just say, "Hey, I'm sorry to interrupt, but..." So clearly I'm not sorry. I'm just wanting to tell you your time is not as important as mine. Does it make sense? So we don't want to use that word lightly, because there's a real thing to repentance. It helps us grow. But if I don't mean it, I'd best not say it. Does that make sense? Okay. So we ought to sit down with the family and frankly analyze the past as we now see it, being very careful not to criticize them. Their defects may be glaring, but the chances are that our own actions are partly responsible. So we clean house with the family, asking each morning in meditation that our Creator show us the way of patience, tolerance, kindness, and love. And remember, we're learning now that the world reflects how we're thinking and feeling. So if I'll ask for that way in me, then that's what I'll start to see. Does it make sense? Because that's what I'm painting the world with. Then it says the spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. Unless one's family expresses a desire to live upon spiritual principles, we think we ought not urge them. We should not talk incessantly to them about spiritual matters. They will change in time. That's a declaration, folks. Any of you students of that other book? If you make a declaration like that in the Spirit, it is happened, and it is your duty to walk into it. Does that make sense? Our behavior will convince them more than our words. We must remember that 10 or 20 years of drunkenness make a skeptic out of anyone. There are some wrongs that we can never fully right, and we don't worry about them if we can honestly say to ourselves that we would right them if we could. Some people cannot be seen. We send them an honest letter, and there may be a valid reason for postponement in some cases, but we don't delay if it can be avoided. We should be sensible, tactful, considerate, and humble without being servile or scraping. As God's people, we stand on our feet. We don't crawl before anyone. You're walking into your identity, folks. I'm going to close with this story. I've told it lots of times, so if you've heard it before, I'll apologize in advance, but I'm really not sorry. When I first came around, there was a guy running around Phoenix. Some of you that have been around a long time probably knew him. Called himself Black Wally. And he said the reason he called himself Black Wally is he didn't want to be confused with all the white Wallies out there. Anyway, I would go down and take meetings into the jail at Madison Street back in the day, and I would go up to the 6th floor. And not very many people wanted to go to the 6th floor because that was people that were a little bit more serious. And so in order to go, I would have to reach out to someone who would go, and Wally would always go. And Wally couldn't hardly breathe, but he went with me, and we talked. And anyway, Wally walked with me for a long time, and then I started getting some success in the world, and I took off, and over the time I stumbled. And anyway, when I came back, the one guy I really kind of wanted to go talk to was Wally, and let him know how much I appreciated the early walk he did with me, and Wally had passed. And so I read this portion of the book, and it says, don't worry about it, we'll take care of it. So one day, as I'm doing what we do, I'm sitting in a courtyard at a halfway house, and I'm taking a young man through his steps. And as we're going through the list of, resentments and relationships and all that stuff, somewhere in that process, I discover I'm sitting across from Wally's grandson. So, I share that with you to tell you there's power in testimony, and there's power in learning to discipline your thoughts, and we'll see you next week.